I first want to thank every one of you all because it's such a great honor to be here as somebody who started the 11th Riverkeeper program with my wife and Sally, our courageous Riverkeeper. I know how hard y'all work because I am I got a ringside seat, and I can't tell you how just invigorating it is for me to walk into our Riverkeeper office, and here we've taken down another giant, and we've done it with lawyers that get paid a fraction of what they should, staff that gets paid a fraction of what they should, and we take down these corporations that are still sitting in the smoking lounge thinking that everything's okay at the airport. So if we can continue to have fun, and Sally, we have lots of fun, don't we?
Yes.
We cry together, we laugh together, we have celebrated, and we have grief sometimes, but out of the grief we find bravery. And then sometimes we have setbacks, and out of the setbacks we find opportunity. And out of those, we sometimes get embarrassed, but we find we need to be more prideful. If we're sad, we start being more stoic. These are all qualities of the Kennedys. And I think Bobby Kennedy has shown us, and his family has shown us, when disaster strikes, how do you handle it with dignity, with grace. And that's how we roll. And that's what makes us all Riverkeepers, Waterkeepers, and that's why Bobby's leadership for these 30 years and the dignity and grace that his family's represented really make him the perfect person, the only person, the chosen person to be our leader. And for 30 years, it's been fantastic, and I have. But thank y'all so much for everything y'all have done, from all of us.
All of you in this room have made the same kind of sacrifices, and most of you, the vast majority of you, share the kind of extraordinary talents that these people do, and have decided that instead of devoting a life to a narcissistic pursuit, that you're going to give your lives to humanity and to protecting our obligation to making this country and the countries where you come from moral examples, and helping us all live up to our ideals, and helping us in making and helping human beings live up to their potential and their ideals. So I'm so happy that Kevin stood up here and talked before me, because my mind was just racing as you were speaking. And as I told you before, I've owned Toyotas my entire driving life. In fact, I got my first Toyota before I got my license when I was 15 and a half years old, and I drove it across the country. And I had for many years, I had a Toyota Land Cruiser, and that was one of the few Toyotas in this country at that time. And that was at a time when cars just were expected to break down when they hit 60,000 miles, and Toyota was the first one to make cars that were actually would go 100,000 or 200,000. You didn't even have to put oil in them, at least for a while. And then the engine seizes up, and I can tell you that from experience. But there's something special about this company, and because the rules, as I said when I asked him, the rules for the automobile industry, as for the energy industry in this country, for utilities, and the rules that govern the way that we use energy in this country were mainly written by the incumbents, by oil, coal, gas, and nuke, to benefit the most addictive, poisonous, destructive, lethal, and unpatriotic fuels from hell, rather than benefiting these disruptive technologies, the clean, wholesome, safe, inexpensive, and patriotic fuels from heaven. And we need to reverse that dynamic. But the problem is, we are facing on Capitol Hill a government and Congress that is firmly in the hands of the carbon cronies, the Koch brothers, who gave in total $250 million during the last election cycle. And we know this, that over the past 20 years in this country, in 96% of the cases, the winner of federal elections in this country was the candidate who had the most money. So money talks in our democracy, and it subverts our democracy. And unfortunately, as all of you know, the worst environmental law that we've seen passed over the past 100 years has been the Citizens United case that took, when we almost lost democracy in this country in 1907, when, you know, at a time when it was said about, and John D. Rockefeller was far richer for that time than Bill Gates is or Warren Buffett is today. He was the richest man in the history of the world. And he controlled about 80% of the oil on Earth. And it was said at the Pennsylvania legislature that John D. Rockefeller had done everything to it except to refine it. And at that time, legislators were bought and sold like pawn pieces on a chessboard. And there was no direct election of senators. The senators were picked by the legislatures, and the legislatures picked the senators that the oil industry asked them to, or the steel industry, what they called the trusts. The steel trust, the oil trust, these commodity trusts that really dominated our government. And we really lost our democracy during that part of our history. And Roosevelt came in there. Teddy Roosevelt is an extraordinary reformer, and I urge you to go back and read his quotes about what his philosophy about the place of corporations in American society. And he loved corporations, and he wanted people to make money, and he adored free market capitalism. But he also said corporations should not be running our government, and you know, they're economic entities. And they function in that realm better than any other entities ever devised. They're designed to get people to assemble money and then to risk it, and they create jobs, and they help drive the economy of this country and make it the wealthiest country in the world, which was a good thing for a long time because we were also probably the most idealistic country in the world. And you know, although we have a tortured history in many ways, most Americans believe that our country was a template, a model for the other nations of the world, and that our job was to model our idealism and to create a system that was based on justice and that was designed to serve human beings and to give them dignity and enrichment and prosperity and good health, and to have a meritocracy where people with talent and entrepreneurs with energy could rise in the system and create things that made all our lives better. And but that, you know, as the corporate monopoly began to dominate and erode and subvert free market capitalism, we saw a disappearance of those functions. And Roosevelt and a group of reformers, Sinclair Lewis, Ida Tarbell, journalists, these fantastic journalists from the press, began going to war, and the populist movement and the progressive movement, farmers and workers from the cities and Republican reformers who wanted to make America live up to her ideals, got together and they passed these laws, the graduated income tax, to force wealthier people and corporations to pay their share of supporting American democracy. Child labor laws, women's suffrage, things that expanded our democracy to include all of these different kinds of people. The Sherman Antitrust Act, which was designed to ensure the integrity of free market capitalism by stopping monopolies from crushing their opposition, from really getting us to behave in a way that was efficient and gave us prosperity and also ultimately gave us democracy. And probably the most important law they passed was a law they passed in 1907 that said that corporations are not allowed to give money to federal officials, federal government officials who are running for federal office holders. And that law stayed in place until 2.5 years ago when the United States Supreme Court and the Times just did an analysis, and Carl did this analysis years ago. We're looking at every decision they've made. And what they found was that it's the most corporate-oriented Supreme Court in history, that in virtually every case where a citizen is suing a corporation or vice versa, the corporation wins. Where a citizen is suing the government wins. Where the government is suing a corporation, the corporation wins. And and this, I urge you to go look at this analysis where they took every case that's been decided by these judges, and it's not a good thing for America. What they said in Citizens United essentially is that corporations are citizens, are American citizens, and that money is speech. And that any limitation on the amount of money that can be given to a political candidate is an interference with free speech, and therefore a violation of the United States Constitution. And we have seen since then, as a result of that case, a tsunami of mainly oil money flooding into the political process in this country. And as I said, the Koch brothers, who I know very well, Bill Koch and David Koch, those two, and there's two other Koch brothers that are in different industries and are not as attuned to those ideological orthodoxies, which coincidentally tend to benefit their profit margins of the companies that they run and own. They gave $250 million to the last election, and it's very, very hard. I have a lot of politicians in my family, and if somebody gives you $10,000, which to run in New York now you have to raise $30 million, and those are going to come in $10,000 increments from wealthy people, and you have to be an ingrate or have just some kind of extraordinary integrity to not take that guy's phone call before you take the phone call of Joe Bag of Donuts, who is who's got a pothole in his on the road. So it's twisting and it's subverting our political system in this country in ways that are really difficult. My uncle had a great friend called John Culver, who was a senator from Iowa, and he said, he became a lobbyist after he left the Senate, which is the career path for most of these guys. And I said to him, do any of your lobbying lobbying clients ever give money to my brother Joe? And he said, no, they wouldn't do that because Joe thinks it's legit. In other words, he thinks that they're giving him money because they want our country to be a better place, and not because they want something fixed. And Ralph Nader's, one of his groups, just did an analysis that said the best investment, the best sector today, the largest return on investment of any sector, automobiles, steel, agriculture, apparel, that the return on investment, the best return on investments you can get in this country today is to invest in our political process, which is just a system of legalized bribery. And it's, I loved what Kevin said, because the independence that this company has shown and the moral compass that they have shown is discouraged by our political process, where bad behavior is rewarded. Free market capitalism is the most powerful and effective economic engine ever devised by human beings, but it has to be harnessed to a social purpose. Otherwise, it leads us down the path of environmental destruction, of commoditizing human beings and treating them as economic entities rather than humans, and that creates a corporate kleptocracy in our country, the aristocracy the feudal aristocracies that our European ancestors fled here to escape when they created, modern American democracy. So a specific example for Kevin, which he probably doesn't even remember this, but during the Bush administration, when the oil industry was very, very dominant, you had 11 of the top 15 White House officials, including George Bush and Dick Cheney, which were former oil industry officials. And they killed CAFE standards in this country, which is the holy grail of the environmental movement. And they made a rule with the cooperation of Tom DeLay in Congress that gave $100,000 tax credits to anybody who bought, any American who purchased a Hummer or an Escalade or 16 other top gas guzzlers. And they took away the tax breaks that people got for buying Priuses. So he was fighting an uphill battle, and that was almost insurmountable, and his company was too. And instead of going with the flow and saying, let's just keep this system in place, they said, let's show people that it is possible to do well by doing good. And that is, at its best, that's what free market capitalism should do for our country. It should allow people to make money by doing good things. And right now, what we're doing in so many cases, the way the laws are written, is we force them to make money by doing bad things. By burning more energy, or by all of the laws that regulate utilities. That's what they do. They reward you for burning more energy rather than for conserving or switching to renewables. And we changed that in California. NRDC rewrote the laws so that people in California, or the utilities in California, now make money by conserving it, by getting their customers to conserve energy or to renew it. Rutherford and I and Laura all know Jim Rogers is kind of a friend of ours, and he runs Duke Power, which a lot of you guys hate because they have the second biggest coal-burning fleet in North America. But something you probably didn't know is that Jim Rogers hates coal because he thinks it's causing global warming and it's going to destroy the lives of our children, and that it's acidifying the oceans. And he wants to shut down all of his coal-burning power plants. But he can't do that because if he does, his shareholders will sue him, and they'll win the lawsuit. Because they have the highest profit margins because they're all paid off, and the average one is over 50 years old. And his customers want him to his shareholders want him to get his customers to leave their lights on all night and to leave the refrigerator doors open, because that's how they make money. And it's almost sinful for us, as a nation, to put somebody that smart, like Jim Rogers, into the position where he has to wake up every morning and has to choose between the welfare of Americans and of our country and of human beings, or the welfare of his shareholders. Because they're two different things. And in a functioning free market, they should be the same thing. And we did this in California. We rewrote the rules so that you can make money by doing good things. And it wasn't a radical departure. The way that you used to be able to make money, utilities made money before dereg, was they would go to the Public Utility Commission and they'd say, we want to build a dam, it's going to cost us $100 million to build it. We want to make 12% interest a year, and if the PUC would stamp it approved, then they'd integrate the cost of the dam and the profit margins into the rate base, so that the utility was guaranteed those profits. Well, today, the way that utilities in California make money is that they go to the Public Utility Commission and they say, we're going to tear the Edison light bulbs out of 1 million homes, and we're going to replace them with LED bulbs that give better quality light, and they use 12% of the energy. And we're going to go into 1 million homes and tear out the refrigerators and the inefficient appliances and replace them with more modern ones that use maybe 20 or 30% of the energy. It's going to cost us $100 million, but we're going to get 3 times the energy that we would get if we spent $100 million on a coal plant or a gas plant or a nuke plant. And as a result of that change, that legal change, which all it did was rationalize the free market and make it do what it's supposed to do. As a result of that, Californians use half the energy that other Americans use. Californians use 6,000 kilowatt hours on average per year. The rest of us use about 13,000 kilowatt hours. So, it's much easier for a company to go with the flow and to just make a profiteer based upon these rules that have been around forever, and that everybody else is just going with the flow. And Toyota decided to do something different and make money doing it. And I'm proud of you, Kevin, for leading that effort and for reminding this company of its broader obligations, because that is not an easy thing to do. Because in this country, the general rules that regulate corporations don't allow corporations to do things that are purely philanthropic or altruistic or even patriotic. If you see Walmart going down to bringing bottled water down to the Katrina victims, they're not doing that to be good guys. They're doing it because they believe that the public view of them doing those things is going to accrue to higher, in some way, to higher shareholder value. If they have a different reason for doing it, in other words, Lee Scott, the head of Walmart, says, let's just turn this into a philanthropy. Let's just turn this baby into a philanthropy. If he did that, even did a little bit of true philanthropy, his shareholders can sue them, any shareholder, and they can win that lawsuit. It's called wasting corporate assets. The corporation is supposed to spend its money doing things that are going to benefit its shareholders and its investors. And they're not allowed to do things, they're not allowed to turn themselves into a charity. So, and this isn't a bad thing. This is the way we set it up. We want people to invest in corporations, shareholders, and have them accumulate money and risk it. And that's, what has driven prosperity in our country. We want them to do that. But knowing those things, it would be nuts to let them run our government. Yeah. Because corporations, generally speaking, don't want the same thing for America as Americans want. Corporations don't want free markets. They don't want democracy. By law, they want profits. And the best way for them to get profits, as I said before, oftentimes, is to spend their surplus cash on a politician and get him to dismantle the free market, give them a competitive edge, and monopoly control, and then to allow him to privatize the commons, which is where all of us come in, because we see that happening all the time. And we're the biggest. We're watching today as large companies and sovereign wealth funds and governments from all over the country are buying up the world's raw materials and resources as fast as they can. And Kevin, I think, mentioned that China now owns something like 90% of the rare earth minerals in the world, but it also owns tens of millions of acres of raw land, of arable land in Africa, and tens of millions in Latin America. And it just bought, or it's just in the process of buying Smithfield Foods, which is the largest meat producer. Most of us have sued Smithfield, and Smithfield Foods controls about 80% of the land, the arable land now in North Carolina. It controls 85% of the pork market worldwide. It's our biggest meat producer. And it's not a healthy, the Chinese are smart to be doing this stuff, but it's not a healthy thing for our democracy to be allowing foreign governments and foreign countries to control our landscapes and because ultimately they're controlling our democracy. And I spend a lot of time in Chile, and and Jose Maria here, the Fu Riverkeeper, and I go down to the Fu every year. But during the Pinochet regime, the government sold every river in Chile to private investors, every single river in Chile, mainly to Endesa and to another company called Fortis. And they're all trying to dam all of these waterways. And they also sold all the airports, the railroads, many of the roads, the timber, all the minerals except for copper, which is now the major producer of revenue for the government. But the leading human rights lawyer in Chile told me recently, he said, we have all the trappings of democracy, but you can't really say we have democracy because we don't control the destiny of our land. We don't control the sovereignty of our land. We can't make decisions based upon what's best for the Chilean people. We're making those decisions somebody else is making them based upon what's best for these companies. And I fought Fortis in a lawsuit beginning in 2008, which, because Fortis was trying to build a dam, the Chillilope Dam on the Macal River in Belize. And we said it's going to destroy the populations of macaw, the last populations in Central America of macaw and jaguar and tapirs, but it's going to do something worse. It's actually going to raise the price of water for the people of Belize. And it's going to cause earthquakes. And we found out later that they had, that the engineers for that company had actually digitally removed the earthquake faults from the maps that they gave the regulators. 2 years after they completed the dams, they hiked the water rates for the people of Belize by 25%, and they tried to do it again 2 years after that. And Belize today has the highest water rates, double the water rates, and its competitors its neighbors in Guatemala and Mexico. So, finally the people rose up and had a revolution and threw out Fortis, and the government nationalized its assets. The same thing you guys know happened in Cochabamba when Bechtel came to Cochabamba and took over the water supply, then hiked the water rates so high that poor people were dying. And this started the Bolivian water wars. You know, the head of the World Bank said, water is going to be the war, is going to be the cause of the wars of the 21st century. That's already happening. You know, the Bolivian water wars happened because of the privatization of water in Cochabamba, which ended up overthrowing the government and taking away that project from Bechtel. There was an article this weekend in the New York Times that said that the conflict that we now read about every day in Syria, that the principal cause of that conflict was a drought which was contemporaneous, coterminous, with the privatization of agricultural water by large corporations in Syria. And that this was the original cause of the war in Syria. So we're seeing these things happen, and today, Fortis, you know, this week, the Public Service Commission of New York State is going to decide whether to allow Fortis to buy all the power plants in the Hudson Valley. And New York State only has, of all of its utilities, only 2 left that are not foreign owned. And, you know, and it's highly likely that Fortis is now a foreign company that, you know, that has this kind of bewildering array of subsidiaries and headquarters in China, the Cayman Islands, Canada, etc., is going to be the owner and is going to determine. And Fortis has said that the only way that they can make money is by increasing deployment of frack gas, of shale fracking in New York State. And they've said publicly on their website that they need to fight deployment of renewables in New York State. And the governor's recent study that came out this week says if we stay on track, 100% of the power in New York State can be renewable energy by 2030. But that's not going to happen if we allow corporations rather than ourselves to make those determinations. And I, you know, have exceeded the time that Kevin gave me, but I want to, you know, I want to say this. You guys have always heard me say that I've always said the best environmental law that we could have is to have true free market capitalism, because free markets promote efficiency, and efficiency means the elimination of waste, and pollution is waste. And free markets, a true free market, would encourage us to properly value our natural resources, and it's the undervaluation of those resources that causes us to use them wastefully. And a true free market, you can't make yourself rich without making your neighbors rich and without enriching your communities. But what polluters do is they make themselves rich by making everybody else poor. They raise standards of living for themselves by lowering quality of life for everybody else. And they do that by escaping the discipline of the free market. You show me a polluter, I will show you a subsidy. I'll show you a fat cat using political clout to escape the discipline of the free market and force the public to pay his production costs. You know, we see in the coal industry, every freshwater fish in this country is now contaminated with mercury. You know, they say coal's the cheapest, it's only 8 cents a kilowatt hour, but they're not telling you that your kids can't fish safely anymore. And that 1 out of every 6 American women has dangerous levels of mercury in her womb. The acid rain, the mountaintop removal, the ozone and particulates, which kill 60,000 Americans a year according to EPA and cost us, in healthcare costs alone, $345 billion. We could pay for Obamacare 10 times over if coal would internalize their costs. But then, of course, they couldn't compete in the marketplace, which is slanted against renewables, these disruptive, more efficient technologies, by the political power of the incumbents and the giant subsidies that they're receiving. And what we do as keepers, what all the federal environmental laws, the 28 laws we passed after Earth Day 1970, all of those laws were intended to restore free market capitalism in this country by forcing actors in the marketplace to pay the true costs of bringing their products to market. And what we do as keepers, and I've often said this, is I don't even consider ourselves an environmental movement anymore. We're free marketeers. We go out into the marketplace and we catch the cheaters, the people who are polluting. And we say to them, we're going to force you to internalize your costs the same way that you internalize your profits. Because as long as somebody is cheating the free market, it distorts the entire marketplace. And none of us gets the advantages, the efficiency and the prosperity and the democracy that free market capitalism otherwise promises our nation. And what we need to understand in our country and in China and in Mexico and in Latin America and in Iraq and all of the other places where you're from, that there's a huge difference between free market capitalism, which makes a nation more efficient, prosperous, and democratic, and the kind of corporate crony capitalism which we are increasingly embracing, which is as antithetical to democracy in America or Canada or China or Iraq as it is in Nigeria. And I'll say this final thing, I swear to God. From the beginning, you hear all these Tea Party people saying, we have to beware of big government. And I agree with that. Big government is a threat to democracy. When we are torturing people, when we're suspending habeas corpus, 800-year-old right that we've had, when we're sending drones out to kill people without trials, when we're eavesdropping on 300,000 Americans illegally, when we're going into people's homes and supervising their activities in the privacy of their home, democracy is being threatened, and rights are being threatened. That's not what the Tea Party's talking about, incidentally. They're talking about taxes, which is a patriotic duty, which we all have to do to support the government that belongs to us. But the real, traditional conservatism said that the danger of big government was the intrusions they'd have on our privacy and our individual rights. And our greatest political leadership, our most visionary political leaders since the beginning of our nation's history, have warned Americans against not just big government, but more importantly, the domination by uncontrolled and reckless corporate power without the controls that make it a service to humanity. Teddy Roosevelt said America would never be destroyed, our government, by a foreign power like Al-Qaeda, but that our beloved democratic institutions would be subverted by malefactors of great wealth who would erode them from within. Dwight Eisenhower, in his most famous speech ever, a Republican, warned Americans against the domination of the military-industrial complex. Abraham Lincoln, the greatest Republican in history and the founder of the Republican Party, said in 1863, at the height of the Civil War, I have the South in front of me and I have the corporations behind me, and for my nation, I fear the corporations more. And Franklin Roosevelt, during World War II, said that the domination of government by corporate power is, quote, the essence of fascism. And Benito Mussolini, who had an insider's view of that process, said essentially the same thing. He said that he complained that fascism should not be called fascism, it should be called corporatism, because it was the merger of state and corporate power. And what we need to understand, and what all of you do for a living, is to keep big government at bay with our right hands, and excessive corporate power at bay with our left, and walk that narrow trail in between, which is free market capitalism and democracy, that respects humanity, that respects our communities, that the power grows from the grassroots rather than from untransparent, obscure forces that we don't really understand or that we have no control over. And in order to maintain that, we need an independent press that can speak truth to power and that can inform the public. Teddy Roosevelt said, without an informed public, Thomas Jefferson, without an informed public, you cannot have democracy. And we need an informed public that is capable of recognizing all of the milestones of tyranny. And today you see Americans in North Carolina saying, well, it's probably okay if a foreign-owned entity owns all the rivers in the state of North Carolina, which is kind of a threat. And people might say that's okay because they don't understand what that means to their rights, to their democracy, to their history, and to their values, and to their control of their resources and their lands. And the big battle, the front line, is happening in control of our water and these issues, the people who want to privatize the commons and make it a profit center for their company or for themselves. And we represent the future generations. We look over the horizon, and we are the trustees for the future generations who don't have a voice in the political process because they're not born yet. And the political process is a rowdy place where, the unions are screaming and the corporations are screaming and the schools and everybody else. But the voice that doesn't get heard is the future, is the kids who are going to be affected by these decisions, by the Arctic melting and by the water supplies drying up and by the acidification of the ocean and by the pollution of our rivers and streams and the mercury that's going to poison their brains. And there's nobody there to talk for them. And what we do as a group, and the way that you deploy your talent is by carrying that bullhorn and making sure that those individuals who we owe a moral obligation to are not ignored in the political process. I'm going to read, I never read the speech. It's the first time I've done it since I was 9 years old. I asked Mary Beth, because I asked her just before I came up here to text me a quote that I loved when I was a boy. And it's from John Steinbeck's novel, and about the Jobs, which is a family that fled the Dust Bowl, and ended up battling the same forces that we battle. And he said, and this is the quote, just before he dies, he says, "Wherever there's a fight so hungry people can eat, I'll be there. Wherever there's a cop beating up a guy, I'll be there. I'll be in the way guys yell when they're mad, and I'll be in the way kids laugh when they're hungry and that they know that supper's ready. And when our folks eat the stuff they raise and live in houses they build, I'll be there. I'll be there when human beings live with dignity and when our democracy is real." That's John Steinbeck. And that is what we do. That is the battle that we're fighting, and that is the war we're engaged in. And it is what you do is so ennobling and so important. You are the template for morality in our country. You are the conscience for our country and for China and Iraq and all of these other countries, because you are fighting to preserve our values and our moral obligations to our children, who otherwise, pollution is deficit spending. It's a way of loading the cost of our generation's prosperity and making our kids pay for it. And we say, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to pay our own way, and we're going to give them a chance to have dignity and enrichment and prosperity the way that our parents gave us. So thank you all for what you do. Thank you